a concussion can really mess with our periods. Some women will lose a period for months and months. It's been reported up to 3 years later, they will have missed a period. And other women will get an extra period, or all of a sudden they're getting more cramps than they used to. Also, history of concussion has been linked to a worse time in the postpartum period in some women.
This is the Anthropology Podcast, the podcast where we optimize the bodies, brains, and lifestyles of entrepreneurs, go-getters, and world-changing innovators.
Welcome to the Anthropology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Walker. As a naturopathic doctor and anthropologist, I optimize the health and performance of badass women working to change the world as entrepreneurs and go-getters. You know, people exactly like you. Your business, body balance, and inner badass, these are the themes we are exploring. Well, my guest today is an expert in a really particular field. And before you stop and go, this is not relevant to me, let me tell you that within our lifetime, either you or I or someone very close to us will likely experience a concussion. And that old wisdom that we learned when we were young, that you should put someone to bed and then wake them up every hour to manage that concussion, that is really old news. My guest today, Melissa Biscardi, is a registered neuroscience nurse, osteopathic manual practitioner, and a concussion specialist. She's actually a member of our business mastermind called the Clinician Code, and I asked her to come on specifically to talk to us about the latest research with respect to concussions. What I want everyone to be armed with is the exact formulation of what you need to be doing and looking for should you experience a concussion or someone close to you become concussed. Head injuries happen at a moment's notice. It is not something reserved for athletes. It can happen when we lift our head and we hit it on the edge of a cupboard. It can happen simply as we move through our day-to-day lives. And knowing how to act and respond when that situation emerges can make an absolute difference in both your short and your long-term health. In fact, Melissa will go into some of the research related to how concussions can actually impact women's menstrual cycles and their postpartum period, sometimes as long as 10 years later. Not only is this information important, but Melissa is also equally entertaining, and it is truly my pleasure to introduce you to Melissa Biscardi. Melissa Biscardi, welcome to the Anthropology Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to jump in and explore a topic we've never really talked about on the podcast before, but it's something that I feel like in the vernacular of popular culture, I'm hearing about so often, and that is concussions. And you are an expert in concussion rehabilitation, and I want you to share with us how we got to this point. But before people are like, wait a second, I don't have a concussion, this isn't relevant to me. The reason I wanted you to come on is because if you haven't had a concussion, you will at some point, or you will be parenting someone who will, or you will be married to someone who will, because this is one of those things that can just kind of blindside you. And I've mentioned this to you before. I've been at so many different events or parties or dinner tables or wherever it happens to be, and people are like, oh, I was totally sidelined for the last year because I had a concussion. And in each one of these cases, what I wished these people knew was your approach to managing concussions and how to really handle that in that first 24 hours that they happen. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, can you just share with everybody a bit about your story, how we got here and why this is an area that you're particularly interested in?
Yes, absolutely. And I totally agree with everything you just said. But so just starting with me, I started as a nurse. I still am a nurse since 2006. And it was always sort of the detective work about healthcare that attracted me to the field. And then in around 2009, I met an osteopath who really inspired me. And I liked, it was even more detective work and sort of independent work. But then a couple of years later, when I was 32, I really was sidelined. I started to have memory issues. I wasn't remembering things that were happening, wasn't remembering my patients' names, and even forgetting names of people I had known for 10 years. So I was caught up in the medical system, and they really didn't have any answers for me. My MRI was fine. My blood work was fine. On paper, it was all in my head, for lack of a better word. So I really had to figure out what the heck was going on with my brain. And it turns out the medical community really missed something, and that was an over-the-counter medication that was really screwing with my brain. And it was after that I really became passionate about the brain and brain health and misinformation out there. And since then, I've really just been dedicated to helping people with brain injury reclaim their lives and really navigate the system.
Well, I think that it's so powerful when it's personal, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And what was it about concussions that drew you in? Because there's a variety of different brain injuries, but and you have a really unique approach to how you manage it. What was it that you were like, and it's that I want to do, as opposed to brain performance or something else?
Yeah, definitely. I'm in martial arts, so I was seeing a lot of concussions around me, and people just were lost and really needed some help. And just coming from the osteopathic perspective, which is that we would rather leave medications out of it if we can. So, yeah, I just kind of, I don't know, I was drawn to that because I wanted to help the people around me, and it just snowballed into seeing, wow, exactly. Everyone I know has either had a concussion, or their loved one has had a concussion, or their neighbor has had a concussion. So the issue became way bigger than I ever thought.
Yeah, it is actually, we both alluded to this, right? It's something that everyone is facing. So can you define for us what a concussion is, so people have a real sense of what that's about?
Absolutely. So a concussion happens when there's an acceleration and deceleration force that goes either through the body or through the head. So you actually don't need to be hit in the head to sustain a concussion. A good example of this is if in a motor vehicle accident. And so if you think of our brain as really jello or jelly, there's a real rattling of the brain inside the skull, and this will cause physiological changes. So the key or the hallmark thing is seeing stars at the time of injury. Some people will actually lose consciousness, but that is absolutely not necessary for it to be categorized as a concussion. And there's really a huge range, because I might fall, hit my head, and see stars, and I've sustained a concussion. Or someone might get slip and fall and be unconscious for 20 minutes, and it's still categorized as a concussion. So the concussion diagnosis, what's the word? Like, you know what I mean? To qualify as a concussion
right.
is very, very, very broad. And I think that's not great for patients.
Yeah, no, it definitely isn't. And I think it's confusing for people in managing what happens. Like, every time someone hits their head, does that qualify as a potential concussion? Like, can you just take us through those scenarios where people have had some sort of head injury? And that, I feel like one of the most common ones I hear about is someone is bent over in a kitchen and they stand up and they just wallop their head on a cabinet. What should we be doing in that most proximate time after that injury occurs?
Absolutely. That happens all the time. I really have a lot of patients that come in with that. And so the view of what should happen after you hit your head has really changed over the years. So it used to be, you need to lock yourself in a room, a dark room, remove yourself from all stimulation. But that is really old information, and we just know a lot more now. And actually, the brain needs stimulation. So if you hit your head, you think you might have a concussion, then yes, we want you to have some cognitive and physical rest. So take it easy that day, but we want you to keep moving, keep walking around, eat healthy food. Like one thing is, let's say it was a sports injury and there's a lot of Gatorade around. That's probably the worst thing you can do. We want you to eat healthy food, stay away from sugar. If you're of age, stay away from alcohol, drink plenty of water. And we actually want you to go to bed at your usual time. This whole idea of keeping people awake for hours is it's old information.
Yeah, I know that comes as a surprise for so many parents. And I still hear parents in the schoolyard, they're like, oh, my kid hit their head last night, so we woke them up every hour. And I'm like, no.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let that brain recover. Why have we changed that advice? What have we found?
We found in the research that just actually wasn't resulting in the best outcomes. And there's a lot of research to support that now. And what's fascinating is the best outcomes happen when you introduce activity early on. So as early as 48 hours, I'll get my patients riding, it depends on the patient, of course, but riding the exercise bike, like really getting blood flow to the brain.
And is that for all concussions, or are there caveats as to when that's the case?
Yeah, the thing is, we talked about how much variation there can be in a concussion. So it will depend on the patient, which is why, of course, it's better to have a healthcare professional leading you through it. But overall, it is better to introduce activity early. So, for example, I just had a patient referred to me 8 months post-concussion. She should have been exercising by now, but she hadn't been. So we started her right away. So there is some variation, but it will be earlier than you think.
And so who should people be seeing? Should they always be going to the hospital first and then follow up with you? What is the sequence and order in which someone should seek care? And if someone isn't I know you're in Toronto, so what kind of care should people be seeking generally post that immediate, that primary care engagement at a hospital or with their family doctor? Where should they be going next?
Yes, so definitely going to a family doctor or other healthcare practitioner to diagnose that a concussion has happened. There are certainly some red flags if there are seizures or if headaches keep getting worse and worse and worse, if there's vomiting, if there's like bruising on the head or face or slurred speech. These are all things like you need to go to the emergency room. But otherwise, you can go to a family doctor and they'll say, yes, you've had a concussion. Often they'll say, take it easy. And then after that, the care actually happens in the community, right? And so seeking out someone who specializes in concussions, like I really believe you should see someone who's working with the brain all day long instead of dabbling, rubbing an ankle 1 hour, treating a concussion another hour. The brain is so complex. So finding someone in your network that really focuses on concussions is going to help you have the best outcomes.
And what do you do with people when they come and see you? Like, what does that experience look like, and what kind of outcome are we deriving from that?
Sure. So when they come in, it's a very thorough, like full neurological assessment, a lot of eye assessment, balance assessment, reflexes, and a general health history. And after I figure out, okay, so a concussion is a functional injury. If someone gets an MRI, nothing really should show up. It's about how things are working and connecting. So when I do my assessment, I'm looking for pathways that aren't working quite as well. And usually it'll be one-sided. So we'll notice, the left-sided reflexes, the left-sided motions are really off. So then my therapy has a few pillars. One is it's going to be specific brain exercises related to that individual patient's deficits. And there is a diet component because, as you know, the body heals better when the diet is clean, when we're not filling ourselves with inflammatory foods. And a lot of people need help with that because people don't realize how poor they're eating until you tell them how they should be eating.
What are some of the key things? What do you focus on food-wise?
So I'll tell you what I really have people eliminate, which is dairy, gluten, alcohol, and processed sugars, and fast food, anything that isn't really food that comes from a box. And really they should be eating fruits, vegetables, they can have rice, grilled meats, not deep fried meats. So a very clean diet. And definitely enough water.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's your
70% water?
Yeah. So what's your take on? Well, yeah, sure, the water piece in terms of that hydration, and also, what about coffee?
I let people have coffee. It's something I'm not too strict on cutting out, but they're not really allowed to put dairy in it.
Yeah, fair enough. And there's so many great options now in terms of not having to have dairy in their coffee. Talk to me a little bit, Melissa, about the idea of differences between men and women as it pertains to concussion.
Sure. So certainly we have different hormones, right? And the thing about women is, unfortunately, we've gotten the short end of the stick here. And a concussion can really mess with our periods. Some women will lose a period for months and months. It's been reported up to 3 years later, they will have missed a period. And other women will get an extra period, or all of a sudden they're getting more cramps than they used to. Also, history of concussion has been linked to a worse time in the postpartum period in some women.
And how long is the connection between when someone's had a concussion and when they have an increase in a postpartum experience?
So it's actually quite long, because that has come up in the long-term research in studies that looked at women 10 years post-injury.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. And the other thing is, when you have a concussion, you're actually at risk for getting another injury, like a lower extremity injury, spraining your ankle, your knee, in the 2 years following your concussion. And for women, the risk is even higher.
And is that a balance thing? Like, what is it? What do they suppose that is causing that?
Yes. So one part is a balance issue. The other, and I don't know for sure, but I speculate it has to do with our mechanics. We're already at risk for ACL injuries more than men because of our hip angles. So it's probably a little bit of both.
They say that you are the product of the 5 people with whom you spend the most time. Imagine you could spend time with hundreds of fellow entrepreneurs and go-getters looking to up-level their business, body, and mindset. The Anthropology Collective does not belong to us. It belongs to you. Come hang out with us on Facebook and let us collectively inspire, support, and cheerlead you towards your vision for contribution, your commitment towards better health, and your journey of mindset mastery. We are in this together. We are entrepreneurs by birth, by choice, and by mission. We are the Anthropology Collective. Search for us on Facebook and come join your tribe. Yeah, it's so interesting, and I feel like the brain has such a mystique to it as well. Absolutely. And for so many people, it's an injury that has long-standing consequences for them. But because it's not visual, it's not an impairment often to their movement. We don't acknowledge it the same way, and it doesn't receive the attention. How does treatment differ when you work with someone who's had an injury within a shorter time span versus someone who has had the injury a long time ago but hasn't necessarily fully recovered?
Yeah, so the approach will be a little bit different. So, for example, I have a lot of older men actually who come to me who have had repeated head injuries. And because it's more chronic, it won't be as aggressive. And in the acute stage, the thing is, so I'm not sure if you've heard of post-concussion syndrome.
Mm-hmm. But share with our audience, right? What that is.
So that happens. So your acute concussion stage is basically the first 3 months. Most people are supposed to recover within the first 3 months. And then after 3 months, it's called post-concussion syndrome. And that's when you get into this gray area. We're definitely still learning about it, but it means your symptoms are lasting extra long, and there's kind of an indefinite period that they will last for. So when people come in the acute stage, I really want to be as aggressive as we can to get them better ASAP. And research shows that if you do that rehab in the acute stage, that it can actually help prevent post-concussion syndrome. Whereas if someone is coming later on, we're already in that stage. of post-concussion syndrome. So I'm a little bit less aggressive.
And what differs in terms of the treatment of adults versus kids when we're talking about addressing that post-concussion period? Is it the same?
It is, but the thing about when you're treating children is some of their functions are not as developed as adults. So, for example, in the eye assessments, maybe I'm going to assess some eye movements that are controlled by the frontal lobe, but in a child, that frontal lobe isn't as developed as an adult. So the baseline will be different.
Okay, that totally makes sense to me. And do you find that the recovery in kids is faster?
You know what? It really depends on the mechanism of injury and how many concussions and if anything else is going on. Something really interesting I've seen is a lot more kids are coming in with like comorbidities, other things going on with their health. And that actually will prolong the concussion recovery. So if you're already suffering from depression, I have 10-year-olds already being diagnosed with anxiety, and people who have other issues like that will have a longer recovery.
Why is that?
I think, so this is pure speculation, but I think it's because your brain is already taxed, not functioning in the ideal way, and then you add a concussion on top of it. It's too much. Also, someone, for example, with a history of migraines, that person is expected to have a prolonged recovery. It's just the concussion is the icing on the cake when your body's already working harder to make things work well.
Hey, you. If you're a colleague, if you're a practitioner, if you are seeing patients, if you are looking to up-level your impact in the health and wellness space, I wanted to let you know that we are hosting one heck of an amazing event taking place on November 21, 22, 23 in Toronto. Impact Lives is our signature flagship event that takes place on an annual basis, and it is a coming together of some of the most impactful people in the health and wellness industry. Over the 3 days, we are unpacking the mindset that has been holding you back from achieving the impact you have always dreamed of. We are spending a day looking at new tactics and techniques, some of the things that people are using in a cutting edge capacity to take their impact and their practice to the next level. And if you want to join us for our VIP bonus day, we are going deep in a workshop setting, 6 different workshops to up-level your mindset, your business, and your impact. Impact Lives is an incredible experience. And our promise to you this year is that when you walk through the door, you will not be capable of leaving as the same person you were when you arrived. If you want to learn more about how you can participate in Impact Lives, check us out online, www.impactlivesevent.com. I cannot wait to see you there. I feel like it just speaks to on so many levels how little we know about the brain. And
absolutely,
it's so interesting because in my practice, we have this, we have a tool called the WAVI, and the WAVI is an EEG brain scanner. It's so interesting. It was originally developed to look at individuals' brains following concussion, or to get a baseline, for young athletes and different individuals who are at higher risk. So we know how their brain's functioning before that injury. And what's so interesting about running the WAVI and what we find is that people are experiencing the way that we can get people's brain functioning the fastest is actually by doing all the same things that we would do to improve their cardiovascular functioning. So increasing exercise, just same to your point right at the beginning, increasing exercise is one of the fastest things that we can do to actually increase the processing speed in an individual's brain. So I'm assuming things are similar when we're talking about concussion, but it's so fascinating the role that lifestyle piece can actually play in recovery.
Absolutely. It's kind of like we will never prevent concussions because people will always slip and fall. People will always be involved in sports, but you can set yourself up in terms of your health and be a more resilient person.
And one more question just about the recovery phase. Can you comment a little bit on the influence of technology in one's recovery? It's always been my understanding as a clinician that the more we can keep people away from the processing and stimulation of screens and technology, the faster their recovery. Has that been your experience?
I definitely find that it's important in the acute stage, like that first 48 hours, because our screens are actually strobe lights that are just flashing into our brain. So that is the last thing your brain needs when it's trying to heal. So I really ask for people to not use the screens. And then when you start to introduce them, using dimmers, either sort of one of the blue light filters, also just dimming the light. I think that's really important in the recovery stage.
I feel like that's important for everyone, for everyone who can't sleep, right? When they're like, I can't sleep, so I'm on Instagram before I go to bed. I'm like, you're flashing a strobe light at your brain. I think maybe that's why you can't sleep. It's all on that spectrum of taking radical responsibility for your life.
Yes, and most of us are running around with our sympathetic nervous system already up. And then you get a brain injury, throws you for a loop. Then you're looking at the strobe light. It's a recipe for disaster.
And, just for the average person walking around who hasn't had a concussion, and I know we all kind of do this as clinicians, we look around, we're like, oh man, I'm the worst for this in the grocery store when I see people with kids and they have Fruit Loops and Frosted Flakes and all this sugar. And I'm just like, oh, please don't, please don't do that. Are there things that you see happening in our world today where you're like, oh my gosh, if you would just stop that, your brain would be so much better?
Absolutely. So, of course, the dietary stuff that you just mentioned, right? Removing sort of the junk, the food that isn't food. That's usually how I say it to my patients. And certainly the gluten we have today is not the same gluten we used to have. So removing that from your diet if you can. Sleep is so important. So part of my rehab is I will give exercises to stimulate the vagus nerve and that parasympathetic nervous system. Sleep is when we heal. So it's all the basics for sure. Diet, sleep, drink enough water. Then the other thing is, but our brain needs stimulation. So I've really been playing around with that recently. Like, what are some fun ways we stimulate the brain other than reading and all that great stuff? And my latest obsession is cursive writing, which they don't teach in school anymore. So I committed, I'm going to cursive write at every opportunity. And so I've been doing that. And then yesterday I tried it with my left hand and it was horrible. But now I'm going to add that into my sort of patient package. It's just a fun way that you can stimulate your brain.
I'm writing a question out right now with my left hand, and you're right.
Yeah, it's terrible, right?
It's hard. And I found too, I started to teach myself the piano a few years ago because it was something I always wanted to do. And I was like, wait a second, every single retirement home should have a piano in it, and it should be part of the programming that you learn to do it. I was like, wow, this is like, it's coordination and it's reading and it's this manual dexterity. And I was like, I could feel my brain trying to work it. And it was a really cool experience that way.
Oh, that's true. That's on my bucket list too. I have to get back into piano.
Yeah, well, I have got chopsticks down pat if you want some mentorship in that capacity. I think this is an amazing time, Melissa, to transition the nature of the questions. And I'm always fascinated in getting to know our guests on a different level. And I call this section of the interview our KPIs, or key performance indicators. So just like we have them in our businesses, I believe that we also have them in how we live our lives. So if you are ready, I've got some rapid fire questions coming your way.
Sure, I am ready.
All right. First question. Who is inspiring you right now?
So one thing about me is I do not get inspired by people I don't know. So right now, who is inspiring me are people in my close circle. You're one of them, but also Jen Oliver and Shyamala And of course, my mom always inspires me.
Oh, that's so lovely. And you mentioned some other pretty epic people there. Fiction or nonfiction? What are you reading right now?
A little bit of both. Nonfiction, well, I've just been reading a lot of research papers, but fiction, I'm just started reading The Fountainhead again, which is one of my favorite books.
What is one thing you're most consistent with respect to your health?
Definitely, well, sleep and exercise both equally. I kind of won't budge on either of those. I like to sleep well. It took me a long time to be able to sleep well. And then I must exercise in the morning.
What is something totally badass about you that people would not otherwise know?
Well, I'm a first degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I have 3 world titles.
Mic drop. That's pretty awesome. And you're right. Like you are a force to be reckoned with, but I had no idea. So that's pretty amazing. What do you do for fun or play?
So I still train. So I still do jiu-jitsu a few times a week, and that is in a kimono, which is basically pajamas. So it really is playtime.
So I have to come see this sometime.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we have women's only classes. Like, it's so great.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So you need to come to class.
Okay, done. And last question for you, Melissa. Entrepreneurism. Are we born this way or do we learn to become entrepreneurs?
I think it's a little bit of both. Like when I think about myself, I think it was always there inside, but it kind of had to blossom.
Fair enough. I love that answer. Melissa, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Where can we send people for more information about what you are up to? Because it's so important for us to all have this at our fingertips.
Absolutely. Everything happens on my Instagram. So at the.rehab.lab. I'd love to see you there. And also, for your listeners, if you go on my Instagram and click on the link, there's going to be a beautiful downloadable PDF called Concussed Now What? And that's going to be your guide for the initial hours post-concussion and what you should do and what you should look out for.
Amazing. We will hook everyone up in the show notes. Melissa Biscardi, it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We are committed to making sure that you guys have all sorts of information to make you successful in your life, and today's episode was no different. This type of knowledge, wisdom, and community is something you can access anytime. Join us on Facebook. We are all hanging out in our Facebook group called the Anthropology Collective. We talk business, body, and inner badass on a daily basis. We are your tribe. Head on over to Facebook, hang out with us in our group, and until next week, go build something amazing.